welcome to Interesting Choices, the show where we take a look at obscure media, movies, TV shows, music, what have you, and discuss the choices they make. I'm Sky.
I'm Kate.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, Sky. So, this is a milestone for us.
Yeah, it is our first anime, as well as our first anthology.
I'm not sure if the audience could tell, but I think we're both pretty big anime fans. Like, you literally have a pile of Gunpla and stuff behind you. I don't have anything within arm's range, but I assure you, I have been raised on the anime section of Blockbuster Video.
Yeah, the only convention I went to for the longest time was Seattle's Sakura Con. So
the first convention I ever went to was Anime Weekend Atlanta, to that for a couple years, and then kind of fell off. But you know, I still got my Crunchyroll membership, and I still watch mostly just stuff more geared towards mature audiences. So like seinen or like the stuff for older women, experimental anime. So this is right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I do a bit of everything. I don't remember where I first saw this. That's another one that's just sort of lost in the mists of time, but I don't think we've actually mentioned what we're watching yet.
Yes.
Otomo Katsuhiro's Memories from 1995.
If you have heard the name Otomo Katsuhiro, it's because he did Akira and other things that he's well known for, but primarily he's known for Akira.
Yeah, pretty much everyone involved in the production of this is titans in their own right, pretty much.
This feature-length OAV, I guess, is an anthology comprised of 3 parts. There is Magnetic Rose, Stink Bomb, and Cannon Fodder. Magnetic Rose was screenplayed by Satoshi Kon and directed by Koji Morimoto, and Yoko Kanno did the soundtrack.
Makes a lot of sense.
Wild. Yeah,
Stink Bomb, directed by Tensai Okamura, who's just done everything. Evangelion, Darker Than Black, Oran Host Club. I could sit here and just list everything he's done for a straight 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Animated by Studio Madhouse. It's just a really fun black comedy. And then Cannon Fodder, directed and written by the man himself, and also animated by Studio 4 Degrees C, just like Magnetic Rose.
Yeah, Otomo did the story and screenplay for everything except Magnetic Rose, which again was Satoshi Kon. But yeah, like just the heaviest hitters in this, and you could tell like everything is so well produced.
Yeah, even for an OVA.
Some of it's a little high concept, I guess, and a little too avant-garde for mainstream audiences. So people don't have the same fondness for this as they do for other things of this era, which is a shame because, like, I think Magnetic Rose is, you know, among one of the strongest cohesive works of anime to come out of the, like, late 90s period.
Yeah, and it's just, on its own, a very solid sci-fi horror, like, ghost story in space.
It could easily stand on its own, and then there's like 2 other things in there.
They're not as cohesive. I would argue that they're still just as good in their own ways. I will admit to Stink Bomb being my favorite one.
Stink Bomb is a fun one. It's a wacky, fun comedy.
Zany black comedy with one of the dumbest people to have ever lived as the main character.
We could talk about that one. And Cannon Fodder, it's very allegorical, right? Like, it hits you over the nose.
It's the most oblique, but in my opinion, it's also probably one of the best. But it's also very much the least accessible.
It is. And the art style is so radically different than most anime. It kind of leans into like an almost Eastern European art style.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, funny thing, though, on the I don't know what it showed up for when I believe you watched it on Retro Crush.
I did.
Yeah, I have the DVD, and on the front, they have the cover is split into 3 sections, one for each of the things. The first one is one of the characters from Magnetic Rose, and then the kid from Cannon Fodder, and the last one is a very somber-looking astronaut, which I believe also shows up on the movie poster. And it's just funny that the most somber picture belongs to the most comedic section of the thing.
Yeah, I always just kind of assumed that the astronaut was one of the guys from Magnetic Rose, but
it's not.
It's definitely not.
Yeah, so Magnetic Rose sort of introduced to a crew of salvagers in deep space aboard the Corona, their ship.
Ironic.
Yeah, the crown. We've got Heinz, the level-headed man on point. We got Ivanov, the overalls-wearing guy in the captain's seat. Got Miguel, the giant stupid head.
Yeah, he's the Lothario, kind of doesn't take things seriously, but he does all the grunt work, so people are like, okay.
And then the guy on the comms whose name escapes me for some reason.
It's not super important. Like, he's just there to shout that things are going bad constantly.
He mans the exposition machine. They're at the end of a long tour. Corporate wants them to do one last job, but the captain says, no, we're tired. Even the ship's tired. We're out of here. And everybody buttons up from their last job, pulling the flight recorder out of a satellite.
They use some sort of like weird bomb that it implodes the satellite. It's kind of cool. I thought they were going to drop into orbit, but like they actually have this thing that like blows it apart and then it sucks back together. It's super neat.
I think that might have been the analyzer cannon. I'm not sure. They've got spacesuits which fit into these exo arm dealies that fit on top, which then fit into a larger mini spaceship. It's just really cool looking.
The mech design in this one is like super fascinating because it really isn't like anything else that you've seen. I mean, it has that sort of like anime mech lines to it, but it feels like just workman grade. This is like the flying DeWalt spaceship of things, right? Like this doesn't, it's not fancy. It's not like made to be pretty. Everything seems to have a purpose. Nothing's superfluous. It's just like it gets the job done.
Yeah, I can definitely see maybe some influence from like deep sea salvage or research vehicles or equipment. Like maybe somebody copied the design and said, hey, put it in space, get it out, get it on the factory floor.
I like the fact that their exploratory skiff, I guess, is a tandem.
Mm-hmm.
It like lets two of those like little exopods slot in, and it's just dope.
And another neat thing, which I don't see a lot, is like the main cabin, like the control center, isn't designed around a single plane, because you have the main captain's seat who's sort of on a horizontal plane. And then you have the guy manning the exposition machine sort of above him, hanging down from what would be the ceiling if they were in gravity.
This was back in the era where people took their mech design super seriously, and I love it because it's like, yeah, of course there's no gravity, so there's no plane of orientation, so you're just gonna like put everything in a circular radius around a center point because like why not? It's the most efficient use of space.
Yeah, wherever there's space to put crap there.
Mm-hmm. But it has that sort of like lived in feel, almost like an oil platform or something.
They've got their own personal pictures up. People are smoking. Everyone's in various stages of undress because I guess the inside of the ship gets kind of warm. Miguel's wearing just a straight Speedo. One of the nicer touches I thought was the captain's booze flasks were like space sippy cup flasks, but actually shaped like a hip flask.
The crew is just sitting around, and Miguel is talking about all of the women that he wants to see when they get back to port. Of course, things never go as easily as they hope that they would because they encounter a distress signal on their way home.
Mm-hmm. And according to maritime regulations, they have to investigate or they will be banned from ever setting foot on a ship again.
But unfortunately, this distress signal is coming from a big old space graveyard.
Mm-hmm. Probably one of the coolest haunted house setups I think I've ever seen.
You expect it to be kind of like a Event Horizon type situation, or like maybe, I don't know, an abandoned space station that like looks like a space station. Mm-hmm. But when they get there, they fly through a bunch of debris before they get to this giant floating debris cluster that is shaped like a big old rose.
Complete with rotating death innards.
You can see all the like bits of ships and things that like comprise this structure, but it definitely doesn't have the same aspect as their ship or any of the other sort of pieces of machinery that we've seen. It looks kind of organic, accreted. It almost feels like something out of a coral reef.
Yeah, but everybody gears up. They do a brief recording to begin their rescue operation. Heinz holds up his ID to the camera and states what they're going to do. And they go in. There's an elevator in space for some reason.
Yeah. Well, they mentioned that there is artificial gravity. So because there is artificial gravity, they're like, oh, maybe this is a legit distress signal because like someone is living here, because otherwise nobody would turn on the gravity because it's a waste of energy. There is a humorous fumbling around in the elevator sequence where they're in their like little exosuits.
Yeah, they're torso pods.
They enter a little chamber and then it starts moving on them, pushing them up against the ceiling, and then they're kind of fumbling around as the gravity engages.
Heinz manages to right himself and leverages his arms against the side of the thing to sort of have something to grab onto. And Miguel just sort of falls on his face like a jackass.
Miguel's definitely the like bumbling one of them all, I guess. Perhaps in modern parlance, he would be a himbo.
I could definitely see that, yeah. They get in, the doors open, and there's a set of inner doors that open onto what is essentially like a very opulent palace, like not what you were expecting.
Yeah, the first thing they see is like a giant crystal chandelier overlooking this courtyard antechamber thing. So they're coming in on the second floor, and it's not what they expected at all, right? Like the year is 2092 or something, and everyone's just like spacefaring workmen, and they enter this like space Versailles.
Yeah, marble columns, sweeping staircases, very... I'm not an architect guy, so I can't put all the words.
Yeah, like gilded walls and all sorts of molding that is also gilded. And just imagine what a sort of like Parisian theater would look like. And that's the kind of vibe it's giving off.
Yeah, they see like what has to be like a literal 3-story tall portrait.
This giant painting of this woman in a red dress.
She's just sort of sitting and smiling at the observer. Miguel backs up against what looks like a wall, but he falls through, and it turns out it's doors into what appears to be an outdoor area, and he sees that woman out there.
Standing on a green hill under blue skies, the wind is blowing, and she loses her umbrella. It flies across, tumbles down the hill, and then she disappears.
Miguel chases after her, and then it becomes apparent that's a hologram because he's waist deep in the rolling hills.
And he kind of like smacks into the wall.
Yeah, we don't see it because the backdrop covers it, but I'm pretty sure he just smacks his face right against it.
Before they really got settled in, they did a reading of the atmosphere inside, and it was fresh air. It's safe to breathe. There are no contaminants or whatever, so they take off their helmets because that's what you do if you're a foolhardy space person entering a haunted ship.
Well, Heinz, being the level-headed block of cement that he is, waits a bit. Miguel, well, first they get startled by the creepiest alarm clock ever. A cherub holding an ashtray made out of what appears to be marble, informing them that Madam Luncheon is served.
It turns around and it kind of like hovers out of the room, and you can clearly tell it's some sort of servant robot made up in this opulent style that everything else is. They're like, okay, well, there's a madam, clearly. So we should go follow this thing, and maybe we'll find her and rescue her. And they have a time limit on how long they can stay there because the captain and exposition man are very concerned about the magnetic pulses and like fluctuations in the area that might cause all sorts of electrical problems and whatever. So 3 hours in and out, that's all you get.
They follow the cherub to a very opulent dining room with one place set up with just a big spread, like lobster, turkey, like the whole anime feast kind of deal. Miguel proceeds to immediately take his helmet off and pour himself a glass of wine, which is not wine.
As Miguel's getting ready to tuck in, and he's like, yeah, we got free wine in space. What a great vintage. Heinz goes over to one of the fountains, turns it on, and this like weird purple sludge comes out. Clearly, this place is not in as good repair as the gilding seems to indicate, and immediately Miguel regrets his decision and just like gags on probably the like vinegar.
He spews it all over. And they go on to find that all of the food on the table is fake.
Unhappy with that, they proceed to go and look through a bunch of different rooms following the distress signal.
There's photos of this lady everywhere along with another man, or a man, and everything's just decadent and opulent, gilded, and I'm forgetting the word. It's really, really nice.
It's almost like Rococo, like levels of opulent. But they make their way to a dressing room area.
And there's definitely like a makeup table and all the accoutrement and just a rack of very opulent dresses, like the one the hologram of the lady was wearing.
And then adjacent to that is a hall of memories, awards, trophies, and things. And you see that they are all for this one particular woman whose name is Ava Friedel. And there's even a little holographic version of her singing. And through this, they learn that she was a famous opera singer. And so you get a little bit of like Wikipedia in their ear from Exposition Man, who tells you her history.
Yeah, she won all these prestigious awards. She fell in love with her duet partner, one Carlo Rambaldi, on the eve of their wedding. Or she suffered a disease or something. She lost the ability to sing. Don't know that they quite mentioned the specific cause.
She couldn't sing anymore, and then, but she still was on stage dancing and doing whatever to support him. But right before they were about to be married, he was murdered.
They never caught the guy. She retired to this satellite.
Now, knowing the history of these two, they decide to split up and go look for the source of the signal.
Miguel's kind of freaked out, but then he's an idiot. He follows the source of the signal to a big, really creepy, just kind of dilapidated chamber with a whole bunch of that goo on the floor, and then a piano and a spotlight in the center, and kind of stumbles his way down an escarpment.
It's the sort of thing that you would not expect in a space station, right? It's like a giant cavern filled with piles of weird garbage and like knee deep with water and goo. And in the middle is what looks to be a dilapidated piano.
Yeah, it looks like it's playing, but Miguel sort of goes towards it, and Ava appears and runs up and gives him a big old smooch.
The scene kind of does that very like a Satoshi Kon signature thing where the reality is just absorbed by this fantasy world, kind of like that same hologram that we saw, where all of the decay and garbage is replaced by like beautiful rolling green hills and like a new piano and Ava.
Meanwhile, Heights stumbles onto a stage where a theater's worth of disembodied clapping hands kind of startles him, and another hologram of Ava stabs him, and he's paralyzed, and then he wakes up and sort of relives some time with his family.
Yeah, it's clearly a time when he was back on shore leave after a long mission. He has this like little cute 2-story, probably German house that he, his wife, and his young daughter all live in, and she's very happy to see him. She's like, welcome back. What did you bring me?
Yeah, he got her a spacesuit, and she's just cute as the dickens, and it's just a lovely little heartwarming family moment right up until he notices all the plants in the vase on his table dying and then slowly reforming into roses.
Unsettled by this, he looks over to his wife, and she's been replaced by Ava.
And she has some creepy words for him. She wants him and them to stay on the station forever, and he snaps out of it, and he's still like, there's still the kitchen, the dining room area, but it's made out of like this white crumbly kind of material that seems to be growing out of the stage itself. And he learns from Ivanov that they've been trying to raise him for like half an hour.
It's definitely this sort of like nanotech gray goo type of thing where it can just extrude into whatever shape and form that it wants. It's sort of become this almost like organic mass that has grown over his feet.
it tried to grow into him, but it looks like the station is using that in conjunction with the holograms, which they never explain. It's just sort of there, and you kind of have to figure out, which adds to the overall creepy atmosphere. They really just kind of nail that what the fuck's going on kind of vibe.
Yeah, you can't tell exactly what's a hallucination, what's a hologram, what's actually real, because like everything kind of flows back and forth between those three seamlessly.
Yeah. Heinz takes off and tries to get to Miguel. Ivanov is saying that he needs to get out of there now. And Miguel sort of succumbing to the illusion.
He is like fully in the role of Carlo, Ava's murdered ex-lover. He's her arm candy. She's showing him around to a bunch of like nobility because she's from a noble background. And he's just like living the life. And Heinz sees him like off in the distance, kind of like hallucinating. You clearly see he's straight hallucinating because there are no constructs.
He's just sort of got his arms out and he's waltzing with thin air and talking to himself. So like maybe the computer is using, the electromagnetic waves to futz with his brain or something. We don't know.
Yeah.
It's part of just a really tense atmosphere of everything going on.
Mm-hmm.
But the Ava hologram shows up and once again wants them to stay and sort of let slip that she was the one who murdered Carlo because he had changed his mind about marrying her. And you sort of put together that she's just sort of been luring ships here and driving the would-be rescuers crazy and turning them into successive Carlos.
Poor Miguel is the next in line, and he's being led away from Heinz further and further into the compound or into this complex.
Sort of being urged on by these ghostly courtiers, like everything's like a pastel, ghostly bright color, being led into wide open doors into a blinding light. Like it's really just
Heinz is appropriately like freaking out at this point, scrambling across this like swampy muck to try to get to him, but these giant structures keep rising out of the muck in order to impede his way. Like there's giant statues, one's like a big old fancy old grandfather clock looking thing. It's just like whatever bits of architecture that the presence can throw in his way to impede him, it does.
And then it grows his own house up under him and forces him to relive his daughter's death.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Clearly, in the past, she was very excited to put on the spacesuit and go into space with him, but there was something wrong with the rocket ship shaped weather vane on the top of their house. And so he climbed up there to try to repair it. She went out the window to join him on the roof while wearing her spacesuit. And this is where the sort of memory picks up, where the house raises underneath him. He sees the weather vane, immediately like freezes because he knows exactly what's going to happen, looks down, sees his daughter, sees her slip, tumble off the roof. This is brutal, right? Like,
yeah, this is a rough moment. Like you see her in that position on the ground that you just know means she's dead. You see the blank look in her eyes without life in them. You see blood coming out of her ear, and you see the trauma welling up within Heinz of having to relive this moment.
Yeah, it's rough. And then to sort of rub extra salt into the wounds, Ava appears in the glowing doorway of the house with a like broken doll version of his daughter, who kind of like animates and is like, "Papa, come join us," while he's kind of like hip deep in the like dead image of his daughter.
He keeps trying to scoop her up, but it's a hologram, so he can't. It's like, oh man.
Yeah, it's so rough. There's nothing that he could do. It's just like, it's just so heart-wrenching to watch him struggle.
Especially juxtaposed against how heartwarming the scene was when he was with them earlier. Like, it's such a well done dissonance between the two scenes.
Yeah. As his mind kind of like slips into this like mixture of grief and hallucination, he starts stumbling towards the living version of his daughter that is with Ava. It looks like he's surrendered to it, but his foot stumbles across his wallet, which has a picture of him, his wife, and daughter, and he looks at it and everything snaps back.
He snaps out of it. He scoops up his gun. He realizes what's causing it is that the AI governing the station has started to malfunction, and he unloads his space gun on it.
It's kind of just like the ceiling thing.
Yeah. It's got like green arcs of electricity. It just kind of looks like part of the ceiling. They don't do a whole lot to make it seem like it's a big old computer. But
yeah, it has an almost sort of like organic look to it. So you're like, okay, I guess I could tell.
Yeah.
Outside in the ship, things have gone real bad. Their ship is starting to fall apart, and they need to do something in order to try to escape from the magnetic field that the station is emitting. So the captain is like, is the analyzer cannon ready to go? I don't know what this cannon is meant to analyze.
I mean, it analyzes things the same way you would analyze a piggy bank with a hammer, I guess.
I guess if you wanted to do vapor analysis of things, you shoot it with this cannon, and then you do the spectrum analysis of whatever gases are left over after you've just flash fried it.
Yeah. Exposition guy's like, but the guys are still in there. He's like, screw it, we're going to die anyways. They fire it. It rips a huge hole all the way to the center of the ship, which sucks Heinz out.
Yeah. There's a long period of him like tumbling through debris and then like getting sucked out into space.
It's to no avail. The corona is torn apart by the magnetic fields. Heinz wakes up floating with rose petals in his helmet. He managed to get it on before he got sucked out completely.
Miguel and Ava are living in this like dream fantasy.
We get a shot of her desiccated corpse laying in a bed.
Yeah.
Holding a rose.
It is the confirmation that Ava has been dead for a long time.
I think one of the dates on the awards was 2005. So it was hundreds of years ago that she died. But yeah, Heinz gets a look on his face. We don't get to see what he's looking at, but that's where we leave him.
Yeah, there are some like rose petals floating inside of his helmet, and he kind of does that like puff of air, and they kind of drift around, and he's like, I guess I'm going to die in space.
I mean, I choose to believe that maybe the scene of the corona being torn apart wasn't completely truthful, and maybe he's got a look of hope on his face seeing that it's circling around, but we don't know.
Yep.
It's kind of left up to your imagination. It paints a pretty bleak picture, but I'm a bit of an optimist.
Yeah, I'm not. I 100% think he's dead, but like he's accepted that he's going to be with his daughter or whatever.
Yeah. And there's a lot of little, before we move on to Stink Bomb, there's just like a lot of little things I noticed before we go on. Like the crew members' helmets sort of fold over their backpack behind them, and Miguel's makes sort of a frowny fanged face.
Yeah, I thought it was real cute.
And as they're walking through the ship, when they hear that Ava's fiance Carlo had been killed, some of the machinery, the shadows in the background sort of take the form of a man who's been hanged.
Yeah, there's a lot of both overt and subtle symbolism kind of woven into a lot of the imagery that you see. It's super well done.
When they're exploring before, Heinz sort of messes with a porcelain musical doll, which falls off a table and breaks.
Yeah, it's a musical doll of a child who you don't really understand is supposed to represent his daughter until later on.
Yeah.
But like he freaks out, and Miguel's like, you broke it. And he's like,
that could have been worth money. And he's like, I'm traumatized, guy.
Yeah, like I love all the shots of them just walking through Ava's rooms and touching things and just them falling into dust.
Yeah, literally just picking up a dress and then it crumbling in their hands, like either because the appearance of it looking pristine is due to the hologram and it's actually just crumbled, or it just was waiting for someone to disturb it to fall apart. This really short kind of embodies one of the more literal interpretations of memories, I feel like.
I understand how Satoshi Kon just like really sat in this space for his entire career. It's very much that idea of the world that we have inside of us and the world that is outside of us are sometimes malleable, and our memories and our interpretations of whatever we see can't be trusted.
We completely even glossed over the parts where Ava's hologram construct floats up into the air in a little bubble of reality to like do ghost magic at them. It's
Yeah.
really freaking cool.
The entire time, you're still not sure if it's a ghost or an AI or if there's a difference between the two.
Yeah. It's really just an extremely well put together, extremely solid just example of horror, of sci-fi, of a ghost story, of a haunted house story. I don't know that I can think of anything wrong with it except maybe the computer didn't look like enough like a computer.
If that is the major complaint, then I'm perfectly happy with it. It is super solid, and you're prepped for something else entirely when you get launched into Stink Bomb.
Yeah, it's very much a completely different beast. You sort of get zoom out from a television. A Japanese morning show is coming on the air, and it's in a doctor's office. It's the dead of winter. It's cold season. Everyone's there. Our protagonist of sorts is getting a cold shot and a prescription because he is under the weather. Then he goes to his job at some sort of research lab.
It's definitely one of those places with rows of benches with like all sorts of test tubes and pipettes and folders filled with data. If you imagine a biological or chemical research lab, that's pretty much what it is.
His colleagues are kind of heckling him because he's been sick for a while, and he's pretty much tried every over-the-counter medicine on the market. It's like, hey, we're coming out with this new fever thing. You could give that a shot. I think I saw a sample on the chief's desk.
Yeah. They joke at him. They're like, oh, you're going to set off the bio-contamination alarms with all your sneezing. So just do something about this because, like, this is useless.
They it's the blue capsules in the red container.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably like the only connection I can think of that this has to the theme of memories. He misremembers that as the blue container with the red capsules. And they are ominous capsules.
They are very ominous capsules. He takes out a handful and he like looks at them, and you see like the single instance of this character showing any level of common sense. He hesitates before like popping all these, and he's like, maybe I'll just take one. And there is this like menacing gleam from the capsule that he holds up, but he just pops it anyway.
Yeah, they're sparkling, but it's the bad sparkle. There's malice in those pills. We cut to presumably the chief busting into the lab, and he is freaking out. He's got bloodshot eyes, and he's like, who did it? Who's the idiot?
Someone took the pills on my desk. Who was it? And they immediately narc him out.
It takes a little bit. They don't give up where he is right away, but they do say that he probably took them, which he did.
Yeah, well, like, he definitely took them, but we're not sure where he is. We think he went home.
He might have gone home.
Yeah, the chief was like, Oh, he went home. Well, how? Oh, God. Oh, God.
You freaking idiots. I mean, it's not the first inkling we get that something bad's going on. It's the first inkling we get of how bad whatever is going on is going on. His friend with the glasses who suggested he take the fever medication in the first place. It's like, oh, he wasn't feeling well, so he went to the break room to take a nap.
Yeah. You get some super ominous shots of just like a ventilation fan.
And sort of rack focus shots of some of the test rats in their cage. And everyone's just sort of like, they sort of smell something in the air. What's that smell?
Some of the office ladies are like gossiping, and they're like, huh? What is that? And one person is like, that smells foul. And the other one's like, I don't know, it's kind of sweet.
But it turns real foul, as we will find out. Nobuo, our hapless protagonist, wakes up from his nap, and it has been a whole day.
Yeah, it's the next morning. He's feeling pretty good, though.
He doesn't really remark on it, but he seems like he's doing a lot better than he was.
He doesn't, like, sneeze or anything. He seems to be over his cold, but he's like, oh no, it's the morning. People should be coming in soon. Why did people let me sleep so long?
And why didn't anybody wake me up? And then he finds out why, as he stumbles into the reception area, and everyone is, well, he freaks out at the receptionist being face down and unresponsive, and then he finds everyone else face down and unresponsive in various states of clutching at their throat or trying to cover their face. He's not bright.
He's not bright at all. Like, these people look very dead.
So he calls an ambulance, and then heads to the chief's office to try to get and see if he's okay. But he died mid-scramble towards some sort of console, and that's where we find out that the chief turned off the biocon alarm.
Which I'm still not entirely sure why he did.
I don't know. Maybe he was worried he wanted to get the situation under control. He thought maybe he could do that before things went sideways. But yeah, I'm not super clear on the rationale behind that. But Nobuo turns it back on, and it immediately goes off.
It immediately locks everything down. It starts a huge conference call of a bunch of frazzled looking
elderly Japanese men.
Yeah. And they all just pivot around. Where is the chief? Who are you? What? Get the chief. And he's like, well, the chief's here, but he's unconscious, I guess.
Yeah, he still thinks everyone's unconscious.
He's very much face down dead on the console. And I guess they all have remote control of the facility's cameras, because they pan it over and they see that the chief is dead and they see everyone else is dead. And they're like, okay. And he's like, don't worry, though, because I called the ambulance.
And the police and the head of research, I think. It's not super important. He freaks out and tells him there's a very specific medicine and some very specific papers that he needs to gather up and get to him in Tokyo. It is important that he not stop and not talk to anyone and get that stuff to him immediately.
Before the police arrive, because they don't want this falling into anyone's hands.
And he gets outside and, we have a very brief montage of him gathering things up and throwing them in his suitcase. And then he hops on a bike and he bikes away, and he's riding along, and we see some crows off in the distance, and they take off and they fly for a second, and then they drop dead. And then one of them, a different crow, not the ones in the distance, drops right in front of him, and he has a bit of a crash.
Yeah. And he tumbles off of a hill into a field of cherry blossoms and sunflowers.
Yeah, everything is in bloom in the dead of winter. He sees dead frogs, dead birds, everything just kind of dead except for the plants on the ground. When he gets back up, he notices the ambulance has crashed, and then he notices that there's a big glut of crashed vehicles on the road.
He's definitely this is weird, but I guess I'll just keep walking towards Tokyo because I got nothing better to do.
Eventually, head of research and the head of the company are called to defense headquarters, I think, where we sort of get a rundown of what's kind of going on. Apparently, they had been ordered by the prime minister to make a counter agent, a biological weapon counter agent. But in researching that, they accidentally made a really potent biological weapon.
Yep.
And that is very probably what our boy Nobuo took.
We also see a very large stereotyped American general being like, yeah, we've got some investment in this too.
Yeah. Huge dude. Mm-hmm. Both of the Americans are huge. He's kind of being tracked. The situation is being monitored by news organizations. He gets to one of the larger cities, and everyone there's dead, too.
You see a lot of montages of people scrambling for their lives and evacuating as he's cluelessly walking through these cities. People are stuck in traffic while other people are just scrambling over their cars.
A news crew eventually finds him while they're reporting on the situation. They're broadcasting the devastation. They're showing this big cloud that he's emitting, which is visible from miles off. It's just this gigantic green misty cloud rising up from the ground. But they find him on top of a building. He's waving a flag trying to get their attention, and they are sort of oh, we should rescue him. It'll be a huge scoop. And then, the predictable happens.
As soon as they land, the reporters scramble out and then immediately die within 20 meters of this guy, but not before the live feed from the camera goes on his face. And then he picks up the camera, is like, please help me. So then everyone knows who this guy is.
He's such a hapless goober.
Yeah, he's definitely doing the Mr. Magoo type, rolling ball of chaos, but completely unaware of what he's doing.
Yeah, he's literally a human disaster.
The entire country's in a state of panic. Everyone's evacuating. The military are just starting to get called in. Meanwhile, back in Nobuo's hometown, his grandma and his relatives are seeing him on TV, and they're like,
he's in trouble. Something happened. Nobuo, what did you do now? It's when they come back later, it just really kind of hammers home just how thick-headed he is.
Yeah, he's the worst. You would expect gas masks or hazmat suits or whatever to work, but the smell is starting to go through all of these protections. that people have.
One of the reporters is like, even with this gas mask on, the smell is terrible. I can't keep my eyes open for more than a few seconds at a time. Mm-hmm. But he finds a scooter and he starts making his way towards Tokyo again. He doesn't get intercepted, but the army pulls up alongside, in the air in helicopters with his grandma.
Yeah. And his grandma's like shouting down to him with a megaphone.
Yeah, don't go to Tokyo. They're telling me a lot of people will die if you go to Tokyo. Don't go to Tokyo.
And he's like, why are you here, Grandma? What's going on? Why are you here?
Why are you in a helicopter, Grandma? Don't go to Tokyo. You'll kill people.
One of the people in the other helicopters is like,
take the shot.
And they've got a sniper there, but somehow they can't hit this guy.
They kind of explain it because the stench has gotten so bad that it's reaching out to there, and he can't keep his eyes open either, so he's not able to get a good, clean shot. So he misses the first one. The
toxic cloud around him starts developing even more as he is stressed out by the situation.
It sort of comes out that as he gets more freaked out, the intensity of the cloud increases because they mobilize everybody.
Yeah, he's driving along and then tanks come by beside him and then start shooting at him, but they can't track him for some reason.
He goes through the tunnel after he's talking to his grandma. Like, he just putters off. It's like, oh, I wonder what that was about. In his scooter, and he gets through the other side of the tunnel, and there's just all of the helicopters aiming their guns at him, and everybody fires, and he's just the luckiest unlucky SOB.
And then you learn that somehow his stink has developed even further.
It's interfering with electromagnetic tracking. It's putting off an EM pulse.
Yeah.
Eventually, it gets so strong to cause some tanks that are trying to hit him to go haywire and start crashing into each other and shooting each other.
Planes are falling out of the sky. Like, it is just a single-handedly just dismantling this entire military who is shooting at him, blowing up the ground, but somehow his like little scooter just keeps like...
Yeah, he's riding the cracks in the bridge, jumping from chunk to chunk.
Still seems pretty nonplussed by the whole thing, honestly.
Yeah, like he might be inwardly freaking out, but he seems mostly okay. He's not like screaming. He's not smiling, but we get back to defense headquarters and the Americans are up to something.
The Japanese contingent is like, okay, well, the UN has authorized that we glass Tokyo because that's pretty much the only option we have now.
Shit got real, y'all.
Bureaucrats, there's gonna be a lot of finger pointing, but go be with your families. I, as the head general, will go down with this ship, I guess. We'll evacuate the emperor. I don't know. Like, we're fucked. Let's just nuke Tokyo, because why not?
And then the Americans sort of are convening with themselves, and there was a moment when they were talking where it's like, I want to do that. I want to be an English voice in Japanese production.
You have to be able to pronounce your English very poorly, though.
It sort of comes out over the next few minutes. They're bringing in the latest spacesuits from NASA, which are completely biologically and atmospherically sealed, impervious to radiation, pretty much indestructible. They can take a hit from a trench mortar or something. And that's the spacesuit on the front of the box that looks really sad.
Yeah.
It's from this comedy.
Wild. Meanwhile, Nobuo is going through yet another tunnel on his way to Tokyo.
And then somebody pulls the trigger and the back of the tunnel is collapsed. So we're on plan ice the son of a bitch.
At the entrance to the tunnel is like a full battalion of like armored vehicles with these giant fans on it.
Yeah, snow machines, like industrial, the kind that they would, if there wasn't enough snow at a ski resort, they would put feet of snow on the hillside so that people could ski.
Yeah.
They're just aiming like a shitload of them into this tunnel to try to freeze him.
But unfortunately, the liquid nitrogen hasn't arrived yet, so they're mostly just blowing chilled air at him, so they can't freeze him yet.
But it's not doing it. And then the astronauts, or not the astronauts, they might be astronauts, but they're in a Navy helicopter. The Americans get there. And I mean, I gotta say, they're kind of clunky looking, but those spacesuits are still pretty dope.
This entire short is set in contemporary times, so there's not any wild future tech. So when these spacesuits come out, you're like, yo, they got mechs.
Yeah, one's got an extendo grabby claw, and they all have their bubble helmets. Do this electro discharge thing and then go opaque gradually up. Super dope.
You know, there's a bit of a jurisdiction pissing match between the army and these American.
It doesn't hold them up. They just start walking forward. Then someone else just runs up to the guy in charge. Like, here's the clipboard with the orders on it.
Yep. They walk into the tunnel, and Nobuo kind of sees them in the distance, and he sees them coming towards him, and he's like, oh, hey, you're coming to rescue me.
They get closer to him, and Extendo Grabby Arm goes for it, and there's like electrical discharge coming off the suits because of the EM radiation in the area, because he's like freaking out. And he tries to grab him with the Extendo Arm because the plan is to take him alive and I guess study him or use him, as the case may be. And he just melts down, and a huge, thick, dark green cloud comes out, and green lightning starts shooting off of everything and destroying all the lights in the tunnel. And that cloud just billows out until it stops. And
it like overwhelms the giant fans that they had, to the point where like it shuts them down. Like all of the military has like fled back hundreds of yards and are just watching at a remove.
And up till now, the smoke cloud or the gas cloud following has been like a kind of a light lime neon green kind of, and the smoke coming out is like a really dark, ominous green. It's fear smoke.
Yeah.
One of the astronauts comes out.
And you see this sort of jubilation on the faces of the Japanese soldiers, and they're like, oh, looks like they got him, because...
Yeah, the gas cloud disperses, one of the spacesuits comes out, and we get back to defense headquarters. Everybody's in good spirits. They're sort of planning the reconstruction of everything. And the man in the spacesuit comes in. Everybody gives him a standing ovation. He walks right up to the head of research and hands him the briefcase he's been trying to give him this whole movie.
And then, like, unopaques his helmet, and everyone's like, oh, shit.
Yeah, there's a collective pants shitting.
The couple of bureaucrats up front are like frozen like deer in headlights, while all the people in the back are just scrambling to like flee as quickly as possible.
Yeah, Nobu is just as clueless as ever. He's like, I didn't think I was gonna make it. Here, let me get out of this thing. And he hits the big red eject button, and the room fills with gas.
Yeah, that is Stink Bomb.
There isn't a lot of deep meaning to it. It's just sort of a dark comedy of errors, which I really enjoyed.
There is something to be said about the cluelessness of people's actions causing harm to others that resonates these days.
I'll be the first to admit it's probably the weakest out of the three. It's still really well made, really well animated, and the soundtrack is probably on par with Magnetic Rose.
Yeah.
It's a lot more jazz and funk inspired than operatic. But yeah, there's just something endearing about how thick-headed Nobuo is in spite of himself.
If you wanted to read into it, you could say that humanity's bull-headed foolishness will be our downfall. There is very strong the military and the government are going to get us all killed vibes going on.
The military and the government and the corporate overreach, you kind of have to read into it a little more. It's not the subtlest of the three.
Yeah, but it's fun. It's very slapstick for a lot of it. It's very dark humor.
It's very much a screwball comedy. And then we get to probably, I don't know if I'd call it the most somber, but it's the most somber art style, I think, of all of them.
It feels like a communist era propaganda poster sometimes. If you told me this was a Czech film poster, I'd be like, yeah, okay.
It's very much just a slice of life in this weird little world. A young boy wakes up with his family. We follow each of the three family members throughout their days in this city where every building, every tower, every edifice has a cannon coming out of it.
It's super militarized. You see that the culture is very focused on nationalism, on this worship of the military. Like the first thing the boy does is salute this giant portrait of one of the military commanders who he idolizes.
Yeah, there's a floor-to-ceiling portrait of somebody astride a cannon, pointing a saber into the distance, and it's very ostentatious, and it's probably one of the more brightly colored things in this entire short.
Yeah, and it's this sort of like idealized, like heroic figure, you know, barrel-chested, looking out into the distance.
Svelte, square-jawed, courageous.
this paragon of heroism and military service and the thing that all these citizens should aspire to become.
I mean, not a lot happens in terms of plot, but we just sort of get this really mundane look at what is a very horrifying world when you get right down to it.
It's almost entirely industrialized. People are tiny in scale compared to the giant cannons that they work on. Everything revolves around the military, cannons, and this idea of perpetual conflict.
There's warnings against spies. They have TV, and the only thing you see is the cannon family or the news report. The husband's job is loading and helping to fire the cannon. He doesn't fire it. That's a job for the important people. He just helps load it. The wife's job is to build shells for other cannons, and the child is at school learning about trigonometry so he knows how to aim and fire cannons.
Everything in this society is structured around the idea of you must help us fire cannons at the enemy.
Do your part to fire cannons at the insidious enemy.
It has become so routinized that people don't talk about the war or the conflict. It's just, yeah, this is just my job. This is just my life. People are just chatting over shells. Like, people are complaining about the working conditions in the factories because they're using toxic gunpowder and they want non-toxic gunpowder. Like,
yeah,
it is the deep dehumanization of both the workers and of the quote unquote enemy, which you never see.
There's no indication that they even exist outside of people mentioning them. But yeah, we go through the dad loading, and it's the biggest cannon, the big red cannon. The circumference of the shell's got to be like 8 feet or so.
Yeah, it takes like entire teams of men just to push the shell sled to load the cannons. And there's like everyone specialized into their specific role.
Getting the shell attached to the crane, getting the crane moved over to the loading sled, getting the shell put onto the loading sled, getting it loaded into the cannon, getting the powder charge into the same place. And we go through a shot, and we sort of have a quick break where we go and see how everyone does around lunchtime. The dad's kind of, it just seems very world weary. He's kind of enjoying a sandwich, but he doesn't seem to be enjoying life. The wife is gossiping with her friends.
Yeah.
The foreman at the shell factory is like, eat as fast as you can. There's the enemy never rests.
Yeah.
It's just this is omnipresent. The enemy's always there. We must always fight.
For lunch, the workers of Cannon 17, where the dad works, manage to get the shell loaded, and you see a very pompously dressed military figure elaborately march down to the launch platform.
He's got a very specific, just for him platform that raises him up to the firing area.
He's supposed to resemble this heroic figure from the painting at the beginning of the short, but clearly he is not a superior physical specimen. He is, just like everyone else, kind of like part of this routine that they're kind of going through the motions, and they're very elaborate motions, but
you kind of get the feeling that they believe in it only in as much as there isn't anything else.
Mm-hmm. When they actually fire the shell, it like shakes the whole part of the city, and that's when you pan over to the factory, and all of the women working there are like pumping their fists in celebration that Cannon 17 has fired a shell.
And someone has to be prompted, but nothing really comes of that. I kind of thought maybe they'd get dragged away, but yeah. The team goes to load another shell. There's a slight mishap. The shell kind of slips out of the crane, and the dad's loading team is confined to stay on the platform while the cannon fires. You can kind of guess that maybe this has happened before from his reaction to that. Mm-hmm. It seems to be like a little bit of trauma there.
Yeah, it's a pretty harsh punishment because it's loud, dangerous.
Everyone else gets to go hunker in a bunker.
Yeah, everyone else is scrambling away. Although the person that fires the cannon does not. He walks right past them, pushes the button, and stands there. Well,
it's not a button. It's like a lawnmower pull for some reason.
He does the thing. Then you kind of just cut back to dinner time at the family table.
The son's drawing, TV's on, the dad's reading the paper, the mom's washing up. And, the kid just kind of asks his dad, why are we fighting the enemy? And the dad's just like, you'll understand when you're older.
And the TV's reporting on the number of shells that each cannon has fired and the destruction to the moving enemy city. But life just continues. the boy has this like fantasy of himself as one of the elaborately dressed military men who takes out his sword and orders the cannons to fire. And you see this imaginary enemy with skull heads and X's on their flags, and his cannon shoots out and destroys them, and there is joyous celebration for his heroism.
That part's all done in crayon.
It's sort of an extension of his drawing from earlier. You see him standing at the base of that giant painting, and he's like, when I grow up, I'm going to be the cannon launcher, not just like a loader like my father.
And it's just a weirdly almost chilling echo of like the American dream. Like, when I grow up, I'm going to run the factory. I'm not going to work in it like my dad did.
You can't watch something like this without thinking of the militarization of Japan, specifically during World War II, but also of Europe, of America, like during these big conflicts where everything in society is geared towards war, and how much it takes from the people and how little it gives back to them.
Yeah. And I mean, this is probably one of the subtler of the three. Everyone looks some degree of haggard. Like, nobody looks pristine. Even the cannon firing guy. His helmet's shiny and his uniform's spotless, but he isn't as smooth-faced as the painting.
It hits you over the head in a lot of ways about the human cost of perpetual war and militarization.
One thing I didn't notice, but I think I need to go back and watch it. But I was just peeking over the Wikipedia article, and it says that they sort of did it in such a way that it is animated to look like one long shot.
There are a couple push out the window, fade into a match cut type thing, but it flows from scene to scene. One thing that we didn't actually talk about was that Stink Bomb was based on a true story.
Oh, yeah.
Which is
the
wild.
Gloria Ramirez incident. Yes.
It happened the year before Memories was released, but apparently some lady who had cervical cancer, I guess.
There's been a lot of stuff based on this. There was an episode of Fringe I remember specifically. She walked into an ICU and she smelled terrible, and just tons of people around her started getting sick.
What actually happened, I guess, is kind of beside the point, but it inspired a lot of interesting media. But I did not expect Stink Bomb to be based on a true story.
Yeah, that surprised me too, but I can definitely see where that came from.
Other weird trivia that I'm going to read straight from the Wikipedia page. Robbie Williams, the pop star, wrote a song about Magnetic Rose from the perspective of Carlos, the murdered fiance.
Huh. I will need to look that up.
It's called
Berliner Star.
It's not on the album that is listed in the Wikipedia page, but you can find it on YouTube. Just look up Berliner Star.
I'm definitely going to do that. Yeah, I guess I've already said which one my favorite is. Stink Bomb. Kate, which one was your favorite short?
I am always going to just stan Satoshi Kon forever. My favorite anime of all time is Millennium Actress, and this is kind of the dark version of that. This idea of like delving into the past and history of a famous performer and the cost and what it means to deal with that as you live your life. Like, there are echoes of this particular short in Millennium Actress, and I love that.
But yeah, that was Katsuhiro Otomo's Memories. I can't recommend it enough. If you're a fan of anime, it might not be accessible if you're just sort of casually into anime, but I'd still check it out. If you aren't into anime because you don't like anime, it's still a good entry point because it's not quite like other anime.
There are no high schoolers. There are no panty shots. There are none of the sort of negative tropes that you associate with modern anime. It's just animation as a medium to tell interesting stories.
For sure. Kate, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter and TikTok as Army of Meat. And where can people find you, Sky?
You can find me on Twitter at Shard_Corso, SHARD_CORSO. If you have any suggestions for the show, you can drop them at our Twitter, which is at InterestingChoi6, INTRESTINGCHOI6. Also, we're now on Spreaker. You can find us by going to Spreaker.com/show/interesting-choices, or just search for Interesting Choices on Spreaker. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your podcast service of choice.
Until next time, thanks for checking out some interesting choices in the sky.
And thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.